Welcome back to McCann Dogs. This is episode 44, and I am joined this week, as I am every week, with my co-host, the Director of Online Training for the My Dog Can program, Instructor Shannon Viljasu. And thanks for joining us, Shannon.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Now, as we get closer to Christmas, we often hear stories about people who might get a puppy for Christmas. And, you know, it's not just limited to Christmas, but we thought this topic was going to be an important one for this time of year. But, you know, some people make these snap decisions to add a puppy to their household. And we know, having a lot of experience in the dog training and dog behavior world, that sometimes that isn't the right choice. So today we're going to talk about how you can figure out whether you're ready for a puppy, or you can talk to a family member about whether they're ready for a puppy with some of the things we talk about today. And this episode's called The Top 10 Reasons Not to Get a Puppy. I'm Ken Steep, and welcome back to McCann Dogs. Now, Shannon, getting this episode recorded has been a bit of a challenge. We've had some technical issues, you know, some timing issues. But as you and I always say, neither rain nor snow nor sleet will keep us from delivering the podcast. Actually, that's actually not anything we've ever said. That is the mail. I was going to
say alarm, but I've never heard it before.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the mail. But with that said, we know Christmas is coming. People are busy, and gift purchasing is on top of people's minds. And we've heard lots of stories where, you know, one of the members of a family gets a puppy for someone for Christmas, and it doesn't really fit the family. Maybe not enough thought was put into the purchase decision. And you do have a line where I believe it's puppies are forever. They're not just for Christmas. And I love that line. Talk about the importance of really going through all of the elements that we're going to talk about today before making that decision to buy a puppy.
Yeah, it's definitely, you've got to weigh everything, and you've got to consider as well, think past the Christmas morning gift. You know, if you were to look at shelter statistics, you would see that there's a peak in intake, you know, a couple of months after Christmas, sometimes even a month or so after Christmas. There's always a peak in bunny intakes after, you know, we have these wonderful images in our head of opening this box on Christmas Day, or watching the kids open this box and this beautiful puppy pops out and life is wonderful and hunky-dory and, you know, end scene. And unfortunately, that is the wonderful feeling that's going to fade when the work starts to kick in with the puppy. If you haven't prepared yourself enough for this situation where you're bringing a living, breathing creature into your house that has wants and needs and likes to pee on things and likes to tear up things and likes to bite, and, you know, all of these things that come along with having a puppy and then putting in the work to raise them properly and make them a productive adult dog, all of those things really need to be heavily weighted when you're thinking about the decision to add a dog into your home. And I think a lot of the times, being humans, we're very emotional, and that scene on Christmas morning of that wonderful excitement with the puppy being presented to the kids and the kids being so excited and in love, you know, we sometimes can't see past that imagery to the reality beyond. So that's what the point of this post is about, is to make sure that all of those reality factors are very clear. And I always say, you know, whenever I'm educating anybody about getting a puppy at all, or a specific breed of dog, any certain type of dog, I always say, deal with the negatives first. If you can live with the negatives in that situation, the positives are a joy. The positives are not a concern at all. You know, loving the puppy and playing with the puppy and all those great things that come along with the puppy, those aren't the things that are going to keep you awake at night, or make it a stressful situation, or make you say, I can't do this, and then end up turning the dog into a shelter. It's the negatives that will do that. So I always say, if you can live with the negatives, great. You're golden for the positives, because the positives are a joy, of course.
Yeah, and I think the idea of getting a puppy at Christmas time, if it's a family decision and it's well thought out, isn't necessarily a bad one. I mean, it is an adorable sight when you see some of those videos. But today we're going to talk about the 10 things you need to consider when essentially the top 10 reasons not to get a puppy, the top 10 things that our listeners should be considering, when they are making the decision whether they think they are ready to include a four-legged family member to their family. And the first one you talk about, Shannon, is that puppies are loud. And I think we, having been a puppy owner multiple times, I can completely appreciate this. But, some people might not really know what to expect when it comes to bringing a noisy little puppy home.
Most definitely. And I always think of my very first toller, Jaden, who was a joy in so many ways, but he was such a hard puppy to crate train. He was a screamer, and I could not believe the noise that came out of this dog. And luckily, I had never had a dog before that was quite as bad. And I've, knock on wood, I have not had a puppy since then that was quite as difficult to transition to that spot where he could be alone and be comfortable. But puppies, as a rule, they make lots of noise. They'll scream in their crate. They'll scream when they're first left alone. If you live in an apartment or a condo or something of that nature, it might be something that's a little bit taxing for you. You might have to plead with your neighbors to be patient with you for a little while. All of the things that might be affected by a screaming puppy. Well, if you go to work and they're upset that they're left home alone, those are things that you have to prepare for. And lots of people will do things like go and knock on their neighbor's door beforehand and, here's a bottle of wine, Merry Christmas, just so there might be a little bit of puppy screaming for a few days. And I really hope that you'll bear with me through it. And here's an advanced apology gift. So things like that can maybe make things a little bit easier, but know that it's probably going to be lots of noisy stuff initially. And as they grow up as well, they'll be barky potentially if you are not prepared to deal with that. So facing the reality of a dog as an adult that's going to be a barking dog is something that you need to do so that you can plan and prepare and, hopefully put in limitations when it comes to when and what's appropriate for making noise and whatnot. But definitely something to be aware of, the noise factor.
Yeah, and I think pointing that out, a lot of the requests that we get on our YouTube channel asking, for in desperation for help with their crate training or separation anxiety, often, are people who are living in an apartment that say, I can't live here much longer if we don't get this sorted out. And I can appreciate, that desire to change something. But with puppies, you can't teach them not to be quiet when you're in the first couple of weeks that you bring them home. They're, it's such a change of environment and things. They are going to be noisy, and as adorable and squeaky as it is for the first, few hours, the squeaking doesn't stop. They continue to make lots of noise. So that's a really important consideration. Number 2 on the list, puppies make a mess, and that is so true. And let's talk about that for our new puppy owner consideree.
For sure. A mess of everything and everywhere they possibly can. So, proper supervision is always a must with any puppy. So hopefully we can intervene before they make too much of a mess of things. But every puppy is going to have an accident in the house. Every puppy is probably going to have many accidents in the house. If you're a fastidious person, you've got to look past that, wonderful image of the fuzzy puppy. And you've got to be honest with yourself. Am I going to be able to deal with accidents in the house? And, I've had several dogs over my lifetime that I've house trained, and some of them have been a piece of cake, and others have taken a little bit longer and been a little bit more challenging and taken a little bit more of my attention to be really on my game watching that puppy to make sure that any accidents they get good information from. So, are you prepared to put in that time? Are you prepared to manage the scenario enough so that your nice white carpet is not being destroyed, sort of thing? So you need to answer those questions for yourself. If that's something that you're willing and able to work through, great. That's another negative that you can chalk off or cross off the list as being okay. But if that's something that's going to be a big bother for you, it's going to go on for a little while, most likely.
Yeah. When you talk about be prepared to put in the time, be ready to, give your puppy good information. Those information sessions, those teaching and training sessions aren't just limited to the daylight. The puppies are going to wake you up. And I remember talking to instructor Kim, who recently got a puppy just a couple of weeks ago. And, I asked her a couple of questions about, how did you prepare for bringing that new puppy home? And she said, get lots of rest. She knew the night before or for the couple of days before that she really needed to prepare for this, change in her life. Certainly being woken up by your puppy is going to happen. So let's talk about that just for a moment, how you need to be ready and get your rest before you bring that puppy home.
Absolutely. And I actually joke about this one. Put on a house coat and at 2 a.m. wander out into the yard in slippers and just wander around for a bit and see how comfortable that feels. It's not too bad in the summer, but in the winter, it is not fun at all. And that's probably going to happen to you. I've heard rumors of puppies that sleep through the night on their first nights home, but I have never experienced that myself. I've always been woken up at least the first couple of nights that I've had a puppy home. I've always been woken up for a pee break or, just for some comfort even. It's a very big change in their life. They're going from having, all these friends, all these litter mates and mother and whatnot, and lots of comfort in that, and lots of warm bodies to sleep with, to now being a single puppy. So it can be a little bit of an adjustment period. And a lot of the times those little bladders just can't make it through the night. So they'll wake you up at 2 or 3 a.m. And this time of year, house training a puppy is definitely not as pleasant as through the summer, but be prepared that there's probably going to be some nights where your sleep gets interrupted. And again, that's just another negative that comes along with puppies.
And I think that if you're used to getting a solid 8 hours, if you're like, well, I'm in bed at 10 because I'm up at 6 or whatever, because that's what you absolutely require, then doing Shannon's idea of doing a test run where you just get up in the middle of the night is a really good one to see how you're able to cope and accommodate for the lack of sleep. Now, puppies are learning all the time, whether you're there to give them information or not. And let's talk just for a moment about, how you need to be guiding that learning process for your puppy all of the time.
Yeah, so that is management. With puppies, they don't have the skills yet. So as you're working, you're going to teach them skills like responding to their name and coming when they're called. But before that, they don't have any of those skills. So you need to be a step ahead of them. And that's another thing. Are you prepared to be one step ahead of that puppy? And we use management so much when we're working with young puppies before they've had all their training in things like using your crate when you can't supervise so that you can keep them out of mischief. Things like having a leash or a long line on them all the time so that when they do the puppy things like grab a sock or a dirty pair of gloves or something like that from the laundry hamper and go running for the hills with it, you can just physically stop them by stepping on that long line and stopping that game from starting. And it's the little things like that that really make a difference with your training, because the puppy that gets to grab that sock and run and have you chase them through the house trying to catch them, that puppy is figuring out, you know what, this is a really fun game. I like this. Every time I get an opportunity, I'm going to grab something and run. So having the management tools in place and the diligence to make good use of those management tools is going to make all the difference. And that's really going to make the negative that seemingly is puppies being too smart into a nice positive, where you can use those smarts to your advantage and help them learn the things you want them to learn, rather than the things that you don't, that are going to turn into bad habits down the road.
Sure. I've said this a few times now, but I think puppy training is my absolute favorite, because the puppies are just so little sponges. They're open to information. You can really guide their learning experience and see a real positive change when you're giving them the right information. You talked a little bit about how puppies will explore the world with their mouths. They might grab some laundry from the laundry hamper, or whatever, grab your shoe if they aren't being monitored. But puppies will also nip, and that's something that a new puppy owner needs to be prepared for.
Absolutely. And those teeth are like little needles, so they hurt. There's lots of great ways to teach a puppy not to nip. But it does take some time. It does take a little bit of patience on your part, and it's going to take some knowledge and some interaction. And of course, that is always better to go into a situation being prepared with and having a plan and knowing what you're going to do to stop that puppy from nipping. But be prepared. You see the, the Disney model of puppies and dogs, and they're so sweet and cute and fuzzy, and they play and they tumble all over you and they hug and they fall asleep and they snuggle on your chest, and it's just all lovely. And there's nowhere in that image where those little needle teeth come out, but that is reality. So if we move away from the Disney model and we get into that reality, those teeth hurt, and they can be quite the force to reckon with. I've my puppies have all run the gambit as far as some being soft mouthed. I got really, really lucky with Ned. He was not a hard nipper at all when it came to just day-to-day life, or he was very gentle taking treats. But then when toys came out, his brain sort of switched to the opposite, and he was so excited about the toy that he was really careless with his teeth. So we did get an opportunity to deal with puppy nipping through that. But I've had some dogs that, like Quincy, my Rottweiler, my first Rottweiler, or my first dog rather, that was 20 years ago, and you can still see scars on my mother's arms and hands from her when she was a puppy, because she was a terrible nipper. And that was a really challenging thing for us to work through, because it was our first dog. We were able to work through it. So glad that we got into a puppy class here at McCann Dogs very, very quickly and very young in her life, so we could get some good direction. And we developed great communication, and life was wonderful very quickly after that. But it was a very challenging time, and it can be a really, really hard thing to work through.
Yeah, and with those sharp little teeth, puppies can be pretty destructive. All it takes is a moment of inattention, or a moment where you're distracted, and puppies can get themselves into something in your house. And that's something that a new puppy owner really needs to be prepared for.
Yes, can and will get themselves into mischief, no doubt. I mean, it's like babies, right? A baby picks something up, and the first thing they do is they stick it in their mouth. It's that tactile thing, and with dogs, that is how they explore the world, is by putting things in their mouths and trying to tear it up and pulling on it and whatnot. So if you're not watching your puppy, they will very quickly start to explore the world and get themselves into mischief. So keeping a very close eye on them, making sure that you're supervising and using the management tools at your disposal, like the crate and whatnot, are going to come in so handy. But know that you definitely won't be able to just plunk your puppy down and say, okay, see ya, I'm going to work for 8 hours, and come home and have, a safe puppy and an intact house. That's not going to happen. It's going to be a long time before you'll be able to trust them as an older dog to not cause destruction in the house. So please make sure that you are aware you will need to put some management tools in place to keep the puppy safe, and to make sure as well that they're not pulling up your carpet, tearing up your couch, chewing through your glasses and your remote controls and whatnot. All the things that smell like you are the most appealing things for the puppy when they're bored and lonely. So no, that's why they chew up your shoes and your remote control. And people often will think that that's the puppy being vindictive because you've left them alone. It's not true. Those are the items that bring them comfort, and they'll start to investigate. And then of course the dog that's not properly trained to understand the rules of the house and has that freedom too early, they're going to make the wrong decisions.
And when you talk about some of the management or mismanagement sometimes of your new puppy, you think about puppies who are outside, and so often people think, well, I've got an enclosed space, I can probably just and the puppy can't get away, I'll just leave them out there. But puppies can be notorious for digging in the yard. So if you have your prized flower garden in the backyard, you need to be out there and supervising the puppy. You need to be out there giving them information, or setting them up in a situation where they can't make these mistakes. And puppies do love to dig, and that's often something people ask us is, what can I do about my puppy digging in the yard? And we'll talk to them a little bit about management and training, and I think people are just hoping for a magic command that will stop the puppy, or some special toy that will be so enticing that the puppy won't want to dig. But what it comes down to is work, because puppies are a lot of work. And talk about the amount of effort that goes into that at least the new puppy owner or someone considering getting a puppy should be thinking about before they make that decision to bring home a new four-legged family member.
Yeah, literally tons of work, tons. And I always say the first year or so of your puppy's life, you are going to work hard, and hopefully, if you do your job and you put in your time managing and then put in your time training, after that first year, it gets easier. So the opposite side of that coin, though, is if you don't put in the hard work early on, things like digging, things like barking out in the yard, those things become habits. So rather than saying I'm going to fix it down the road, it's so much better to fix it now. And that means supervising. That means giving up your time. So, instead of just throwing the dog out in the yard while you want to clean the house or something of that nature, if you want to have that puppy outside, you really need to be outside with that puppy. And that gives you the opportunity to give them feedback right away. If you see them starting to dig right away, you can say, hey, oh, no, you're not allowed to do that. And you can redirect them to something else. If they start barking out in the yard right away, you can say, hey, that's not an acceptable thing. Stop the barking and again, redirect them to something else. Rather than being in a situation where they're outside, they start digging, nobody tells them it's wrong. And it's one of those self-rewarding behaviors. Same thing with barking. It's fun. It's an energy release. It's, sometimes it makes them feel better if they're thinking that there's something awry in the yard and they need to voice concern. That's a little bit alleviating for stress in that situation. So they're self-rewarding behaviors. And if nobody's there to say, hey, that's wrong, the puppy thinks that's right. And then after a few times, it becomes habitualized. So now you've created a situation where essentially the puppy thinks the backyard is all about digging and barking instead of, the backyard is a place to go to the bathroom and hang out and be a good dog. And we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot in those situations. So put in the work now. Know that first year is going to be a lot of work, but it will pay off so much once you get to the end of that year. And now you just sort of taper off and use your management and use the skills that you've taught that puppy to continue on with a really nice life. With the occasional reminders and obedience, you're going to have a great time for hopefully the next 10 or 15 years for your puppy. But if you don't put in the work for that first year, you're probably going to end up backtracking and having to solve a lot of problems that'll crop up.
It's really an investment, in time, that, as you mentioned, will pay off for the next 15 years, but it's also an investment financially. Getting a new puppy is quite an expensive process, and which isn't a big deal if you are prepared for it or you're aware of some of the costs involved when you're getting a new puppy.
Yeah, absolutely. And sit down and make a list of those costs. We actually have a couple of blog posts, the cost of a puppy. I think I have a two-parter actually on the cost of a puppy as they grow up. There's more things to consider, but it's not just that initial purchase price. That's a big thing, of course, but you've also got beds and toys and food and vet visits and crates and collars and leashes and obedience training and their next vet visits. And there's spay and neuter if you decide to do that within the first year or so. Obedience school, there's so many expenses that come along with a puppy. It's not just that initial purchase price. So sit down, make a list of all the things that that you have to spend money on, and make sure that that's within your budget as well. Because of course you don't want to shortchange any aspect of a puppy's life. You want to make sure that you are able to afford the obedience classes early on, and you are able to afford the best vet care for your dog and whatnot. So be sure that you're well aware of those costs as well.
Yeah, there will be lots of surprises along the way for sure. But one thing that won't be a surprise is that your puppy will grow up. All puppies, regardless of how cute and fluffy they are when they are, really young, they'll grow up both in their physical size, as well as some of the behaviors that they've learned or that you've taught them. So we need to talk for a moment about how our new puppy owner is going to be a dog owner in the not too distant future.
Yeah, absolutely. Things that might not occur to you right away when you're dealing with that cute, fuzzy, adorable little puppy. Your average size dog is probably somewhere around 50 pounds, but there are extremes, of course. So sometimes you're dealing with a 150-pound adult dog. Are you going to be able to properly house that dog? If you still need a crate when that dog is a year old, which is very likely, do you have room for that crate? How are you going to transport that dog in the car safely? There's all sorts of things that come along with the adult dog that you might not think too much about when you're looking at the puppy. If you get a Great Dane, there's things to consider. There's more expenses when it comes to the things that you need to buy. So that's something you need to consider with your cost of a puppy as well. It costs a lot more to buy a giant crate for a Great Dane than it does to buy a little puppy crate for a toy poodle, for example, that's going to last them their whole life. All of those things are things that need to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about adding a dog to the home. So don't just think about the puppy in the first couple of months. Think past those few months for all of these things. Make sure that you can deal with all those negatives. Make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. And if you need resources to find that out, find a breed club, find the breeders in that breed, and go and talk to them. Talk to them about the adult dogs. Talk to them about the negative factors in owning those adult dogs. Again, if you can get past the negative factors, you're going to love the positives. So don't let the positives be your deciding factor. Make sure it's the negatives and that you can live with those negatives, or at least work through those negatives until they're no longer an issue.
And that leads us directly into our next point. I mean, if you have made some of these considerations about the adult dog, as well as really thought about the other points that we had mentioned earlier in the podcast, owning a dog can change your life. I love that saying that dogs aren't our whole lives, but they make our lives whole. And I truly believe that. Up until this point in the podcast, you may be wondering how, as dog trainers, we can dislike puppies so much. But I think this is the reality of the situation, that anyone needs to really consider the points that we talked about today before they make that purchase, before they surprise someone for Christmas, or before they add a new four-legged family member to their household.
Yeah, absolutely. Just think past the negatives, and those positives are wonderful. Absolutely lovely, and they'll make your life great. And if you are at the point where you can live with all those negatives, great. Get the puppy and you will love it. You'll have a blast with them. You know what? We can definitely work through any of the issues that come up with a puppy, as long as you've got the stick-to-itiveness to make those choices and to make it past those negatives and the bad things that come along with the puppy phase. And there are lots of wonderful things with puppies as well. It's not just the negatives, but I think the negatives are really what make or break the situation.
Yeah, and I think if you have you're listening at home or wherever you're listening to your podcast, and you're thinking to yourself, geez, this family member or this friend was talking about getting a puppy, I think this would be good information for them. Make sure you share this podcast with them, because it's so important to really know as a dog owner, as a puppy owner, what you're getting into. And so many of these little things we've talked about today are oversights, or things that you wouldn't have really thought about. Talking at the end about puppies growing up, it also sort of referring back to when Shannon mentioned that the time investment with your puppy. We talk about giving your dog the right information, good information, because puppies are always learning. And a great way to do that is to give your puppy clear, consistent, and fair information. And that's exactly what we do in the My Dog Can online dog training program, which Shannon is in fact the director of. So tell our listeners just a little bit about the My Dog Can program, Shannon.
Absolutely. My Dog Can is our grade 1 program, and we've adapted it for an online environment. So it teaches all of the basics that you'll want to have a well-behaved dog. Coming when called is one of our top priorities. We want to make sure we can always rely on our recall. We can always keep our dogs safe, and we can always rely on calling them back to us. So coming when called is a huge part of the program. Walking nicely with you on leash is a big part of the program as well. And we also work on sit and down stays, so that we've got an element where we can build emotional control and we can build a stationary exercise. And that's really important for your dog's development, as well as to be able to have a little bit of emotional control and be able to stay put when asked to. So it is 8 weeks of obedience lessons delivered to you, but you actually get access to it all for 4 months. So you've got lots of time to work through, and that gives you access to all of the videos that we have. And that includes a lot of what we call core videos. And we talk about things like tug and out. We talk about how to drop objects on command, how to leave objects on command. There's all sorts of support to make use of in the program. We've got a great Facebook group that we chatter back and forth, exchange all sorts of ideas, talk about all sorts of different training aspects. And then you can also get support by calling us, by emailing us. You can send us videos and we'll critique. So there's all sorts of ways for us to interact and help you through the program when you run into snags. It's a great program. It's lots of fun.
It's really the thing that differentiates us from a lot of the other dog training, online dog training services, is the access to support that you have as you're taking the program. We have people that are in the program from all over North America, maybe all over the world. I haven't checked our list recently, but we know we get phone calls, we get emails. That Facebook group is active with people talking about the successes that they've had with their dog. Actually, I just remembered an Instagram post that I need to share of someone who brought their dog to the pool with them, and before it may not have been a consideration, but now her dog is so well behaved that he can just lie down, next to the pool while she has a swim. And the access to the experience. I know we talked the other day about the amount of experience simply with the full-time instructors. We have 16 full-time staff at McCann Professional Dog Trainers and many, many associate instructors. And tell our listeners about how much experience there is simply in the 16 full-time staff.
3 centuries.
It's
there is
remarkable.
295 years of collective experience. And that blew my mind when I was adding those numbers up the other day. But you know what? It actually, this morning, I made use of that because I was asked a question from one of our My Dog Ken clients about a herding cue. And I thought, I don't know anything about herding, but I'm going to ask the brain trust. And I was able to tap into a couple of other instructors, yourself included. You do herding with Mac. And I was able to ask that question, what do you think of this? This was a question about the person that wants to do herding with their dog. And I got a great answer. And I was able to go back to him and say, no problem. This is the answer to your question, even though I really don't know anything about herding. So tapping into that experience, it's an amazing thing. Mind blowing.
And it allows us to personalize the program for, each student if they have an unusual request, or if they're having, an atypical challenge that they are just having trouble getting over. Not only can they reach out to the community in the Facebook group, but they can reach out to the professional dog trainers. They can call, they can email. I mean, that's really what I love about it. And that's really, I'm quite proud of the opportunities that I've had to speak with the students, to engage with the students, and to help them be successful. So I'm going to drop a link in the show notes below, and if you're watching this on our YouTube podcast, I'll drop a link in the description to our My Dog Can program, where right now you can take the first lesson absolutely free, so you definitely want to check that out. With that said, I want to thank you for listening. I hope we've given you a little bit of insight when it comes to knowing whether you're ready to get yourself bringing a puppy into your household. And if this is your first time on our YouTube podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We publish new videos every single week to help you understand how dogs think and learn. And on that note, I'm Ken. I want to thank Instructor Shanna for joining us. We'll wish you well, everybody. Happy training.
Bye, everybody.